Hello, good morning. This is another lesson for engineering economy, and today the video is about inflation. Okay, so bago nga pala tayo mag-start sa topic, last time, o yung, I think the very first video that I uploaded dito sa engineering economy playlist, ito lang ang kita. Ito lang yung buong page ng Good Notes. Kaso lang, kapag yung calicule kasi ay nilalabas natin, napuputol kasi. So, hindi ko na kinrop yung video. Okay, so I'll be showing the whole screen. Ayan. So, para hindi maputol yung calculator. Hindi ko na i-trim yung hindi ko na i-crop yung video. Okay, so, inflation. Tapos na tayo kasi sa interests. Okay, yung simple and the introduction for compound interest. Now we have inflation. Medyo siningit lang natin to. So, inflation refers to the rise in the prices of most goods and services of daily or common use such as food, clothing, housing, recreation, transport, consumer staples, etc. Okay, so we all know that inflation refers to the increase of price of goods and services as time goes by. Okay, so pataas ang presyo. Pero do we know more other than that fact? Okay, is inflation good? Is inflation bad? Okay, and what does inflation really mean? Anong nasa ilalim ng inflation? Why do we need to raise prices? Para lang ba mahirapan yung mga tao? Well, hindi naman. Okay, there are some factors that pushes inflation. Okay, and inflation is not entirely bad. Okay, hindi porket pataas ang presyo, pinahihirapan lang ang tao. No. Okay, so nangyayari talaga yan. And we'll continue. It measures the average price change in the basket of commodities and services over time. Now, how do we measure inflation? Okay? So, let's say, meron kasing ginagamit na standard ang ating mga authorities to measure or to generate reports about inflation. Meron tayong tinatawag na basket. Okay? And this basket contains items like yung kinokonsume palagi ng mga tao, like eggs, milk, we have the rice, we have the meat, and other goods, pati yung mga services na kadalasan ginagamit ng tao. Okay? So, etong price na yan, say for this year, ang price ng basket na yan is $10. Okay? Then, for the next year o last year naman, ang price ng basket na yan is $9. So, you compute the rate or the change dito sa price ng basket na yan. And there you have the inflation. Okay? So, ganun siya kino-compute. May isang basket na laman niya yung mga commodities na gamit ng mga tao. And sinusukat natin yung rate of change niya over o yearly. Okay? And then we have the inflation report. Okay? So, inflation is the indicative of the decrease in purchasing power of a unit of a country's currency. This is measured in a percentage. Ito kasing inflation, syempre, ang naaapektuhan yan ay dalawa. Okay? It affects the cost or price of goods and services. Okay? So, ayun. Pataas ang presyo if the inflation is positive. Okay? Yung pababa naman, negative inflation or deflation, that is pababa naman yung price ng commodity. Okay? And it also affects the purchasing power of money. Okay? When you say purchasing power, ano yung kayang bilihin ng pera mo? Okay? When there is positive inflation, ibig sabihin pamahal yung mga items, then your money gets weaker. Okay? If last year nakapagtabi ka ng 1,000 pesos sa bulsa mo, and you know that it can buy a 1,000 peso worth of goods that year, yung 1,000 pesos mo na yan, next year, hindi niya na kayang bilhin yung goods na yon. Kasi that goods ay nag-increase na ng price. So, ibig sabihin, it can no longer afford the things you can afford last year. Okay? So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng purchasing power of money. Nagde-decrease because of inflation. Humihina yung pera because the bilihin ay pataas ng pataas yung presyo. Okay? So, ayun. Pero is inflation bad? Okay? Not exactly bad. Kasi, there are, yung inflation kasi, controlled inflation to be exact, is one of the things na ginagamit natin para sukatin yung performance ng economy. Meron tayong tinatawag na economic indicators. Ano yung economic indicators? Ito yung gamit natin, gauge natin to measure the performance of a nation or of a country's economy. Okay? Ano yung mga economic indicators natin? Isa rito yung inflation, pero siguro banggitin na rin natin yung iba. We have first the gross domestic product. I think alam nyo na to from your high school economics or GDP. Okay? The more products na may produce within the country, the more labor force that is available on a country or a nation, then the gross domestic product increases. And increase in GDP indicates a healthy and a good performing economy. Okay, ibig sabihin, may mga pera ang mga tao, they have the power to spend, okay, and they have the power to produce, the businesses are doing great, okay, etc. Okay, so of course, gross domestic product increasing symbolizes a very good performance of the economy. Okay, and next is unemployment rate. Siyempre, kabaliktaran ng gross domestic product, unemployment rate is bad for a country. If the employment rate is very high, ibig sabihin maraming walang trabaho, ibig sabihin maraming walang pera, ibig sabihin yung mga tao walang pambili para sa mga kailangan nila or sa mga gusto nila, ibig sabihin the performance of businesses ay hindi maganda kasi walang pera yung mga tao, and chain effect yan. Okay? So, ayaw natin na mataas ang unemployment rate. But the employment rate can never be 0%. It is impossible na walang trabaho. Okay? For more information about this, I suggest you watch videos from this playlist sa YouTube. Wait lang. Okay, so I have it ready para sa inyo. So ito, just search economics crash course sa YouTube. This is a very good channel para sa mga basic concepts ng economics. Okay? Although, hindi natin kasi didiscuss to dito sa engineering economy because we are more on the mathematical side of this subject. Pero it's good to know your basics of economics. Lalo na kung hindi ka nakinig dito nung high school ka or kung tinakasan mo to or nagcutting ka or hindi mo na talaga binigyan ng pansin dahil nakakainip. So, yun. Pero it plays a very important role lalo na sa buhay mo. Okay, sa real life. Next na economic indicator, palatandaan kung maganda ba yung economy ng isang bansa or hindi, is the Consumer Price Index, CPI, or ito yung nag-i-indicate din na inflation. Okay? If the Consumer Price Index is rising, of course, there is inflation. Okay? Pero, sabi ko nga, masama ba yung inflation or hindi? Ang tinatarget ng mga bansa, okay, ay hindi 0% na inflation. Okay? At ayaw din nila na bumaba ang presyo. Why? Corruption na naman ba? No. Ganito, ang maganda sa isang bansa or sa isang nation is controlled inflation. Because inflation is not entirely bad. Okay? It just happens. So, controlled inflation is 2% to 3% annually. Okay? If a country, minsan may 1 to 2% or 2 to 3% or 1 to 3%. So, depende sa country. Okay? And ang nagmo-monitor nga pala nito is the central bank of a country. Ito sa atin, I think that's the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. That's our central bank. Okay? For the US, it's the Fed or the Federal Reserves. For the other countries like UK, it's the nalimutan ko yung pangalan ng bank. For the New Zealand, there is may bank din, their central bank. I think you can search them. At At tignan nyo yung, yung kanilang inflation target. May target yan. Okay? So, why controlled inflation? Bakit kailangan magtaas pa ng presyo? Ba't hindi na lang steady yung mga presyo para mas nakakabili yung mga tao? Remember that the prices are, mas mataas yung presyo, it benefits the seller, but it, tawag dyan, hindi siya maganda para sa mga buyers. Pero, at some point of our life, sa buhay ng bawat tao, hindi ka naman laging buyer, hindi ka naman laging seller. Okay? So, you are both. Nag-sell ka, nag-buy ka. Okay? So, kung mataas yung presyo, pabor sa'yo yun, minsan. Okay? Kung ikaw ay seller. Okay? Kung buyer ka naman, ayaw mo nang ganun. Pero it has to be balanced. Okay? Bakit ba nangyayari inflation? Let's say we have an item here as an example. Okay? If there is an item na mataas ang demand, maraming tao ang naghahangad sa kanya. Ibig sabihin may pera yung mga yan. Okay? And they buy that because they can buy that. Okay? If the economy, itong mga tao na to symbolizes the economy, o yung mga tao, if they can afford that item, tendency is they're going to outbid each other. Ibig sabihin, if of course this item is limited, okay, scarce, the demand is up, ibig sabihin, pataas din ng pataas yung presyo because the buyers are trying to outbid each other. Okay? That's it. Ibig sabihin, kung tumataas ang presyo ng item na yan, ibig sabihin, may mga pera yung mga tao, and that is a good symbol, or that is a good indicator of the performance of the economy. Kita niyo ba? Nakita niyo na kung bakit kailangan natin na meron tayong inflation. That is because that is a signal, that is an indicator na may pera yung mga tao. Kaya meron inflation. Okay? On the other hand, kung walang pera yung mga tao, then kahit gaano pa kaganda yung item na yan, walang bibili dyan. Kasi wala kang pambili yung tao. So, ang mangyayari, bababa yung presyo niya. Kasi there is no demand. Okay? If may pagbaba ng mga presyo sa lahat ng mga bilihin, even the necessary commodities, then that is a sign of a bad economy. Kasi walang pambili yung mga tao. Okay? So, hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na if there is negative inflation or if there is deflation, maganda economy, no? Okay? A controlled inflation is a sign of a healthy economy. Ibig sabihin, may mga pera yung mga tao, they have the power to buy things. Okay? So, ayun, ang hindi maganda is yung hyperinflation. Okay? Hyperinflation ay yung pera mo, kasi diba kapag may hyperinflation, sobrang tataas ng mga bilihin. Ibig sabihin, on the other hand, yung purchasing power ng pera mo ay paliit ng paliit. Okay? Try to search the case of, I think, Venezuela, the country of Venezuela, and how they had their hyperinflation. I think that's way back 2014 ata, kung hindi ako nagkakamali. Okay? Na ang nangyayari, yung mga pera nagkalat na lang sa kalsada because they virtually have no value. Diba? Tandaan mo na ang pera ay may value because we believe that they have value. Okay? We believe that they can buy us things. We can get us things that we want or we need. Okay? That's why may pera, may value yung pera. Okay? Pero if your money cannot do anything for you, walang silbi yan. Right? So, ayun. Kaya kapag may hyperinflation, nawawalan ng value yung mga pera. Para ang sabi nga dun ay, I think yung pera nila na makakabili ng sasakyan last year, ay hindi yung bago mag 2014, ang mabibili na lang after or during the hyperinflation phase o hyperinflation na stage in their country, ang mabibili na lang is tinapay. Isipin mo yun, dating makakabili ng sasakyan, ngayon ang mabibili na lang is tinapay na lang because of hyperinflation. Okay, so yun ang masama, hyperinflation. And deflation o yung pagbaba ng pera, pagbaba ng cost ng mga item is not good din. Okay, kasi it symbolizes na yung mga tao walang pera, or if they have, aantayin nilang bumaba pa yung presyo and magkakaroon ng freeze sa economy. We don't want that. Okay? Kapag walang spending, masama yun para sa economy. Kasi walang pera yung mga tao. Walang pera yung mga businesses because they have no sales. Okay? So, it is a good thing to know and to understand that controlled inflation is good for the economy. And you expect na tataas talaga ng tataas ang presyo ng mga bilihin over time. Okay, hindi yan bababa. So, unless meron parang bagay na mangyari sa economy, pagka nakikita mo bumaba yung presyo ng mga bilihin, masaya yan sa simula kasi ang mura na lang ng ganito. Pero on the long run, hindi yan maganda for the whole economy. Okay? So, kung gusto nyo pang mag-research ng mga bagay or kung gusto nyo, kung very interested kayo sa ganitong topic, I highly suggest na pag-aralan nyo yung engineering, yung economics crash course dun sa YouTube. Hindi sponsored. Wala lang, I suggest. Lalo na kung nagabalak kayo pumasok into stock trading or into forex market, into investing, you need to understand those things. Okay? Next is the causes of inflation. Bago tayo kasi mag-math, kailangan naintindihan natin kung para saan to. Okay? We have the demand pull, okay? We have the cost push, and we have the built-in inflation. Okay? The demand pull inflation refers to situations where there are not enough products or services being produced to keep up with the supply, causing their price to increase. Okay? Kapag walang supply, anong tawag natin doon kapag walang supply? Kasi dalawa yun eh. Either you have surplus or shortage. Okay? Let's draw or let's show you the supply and demand graph. Okay? So, I think this is not the first time na makikita nyo to. Itong y-axis natin, ang nandito is yung price. Price of commodities. Let's say price of goods na lang. Okay? Tapos, mag-example lang tayo ng isang item, isang goods. Let's say, pork. Price of pork. Tapos, we have quantities of pork. Now, we have two graphs or we have two curves na pwede nating pakita dito sa graph na yan. Let's look first sa buyers, okay? This is the buyers graph. Wala tong maliit na to Ayan. This is, yung kulay blue, gawin na rin natin blue. This is the buyers graph. Okay, ito yung tinatawag natin na demand curve. Yung kulay blue na yan. Okay, discuss muna natin yan. Itong kulay blue, let's say, kung ang presyo kung naandito tayo, if the price of pork is very high, tignan nyo, ang taas ng pwesto niya sa y-axis, then the demand for pork is very low. Diba? Konting quantities lang ng pork ang mabibili. Okay? This shows na, sabi ko nga, if the price is high, then the quantities of pork na mabibili ay konti lang. On the other hand, this is true for the buyers, itong graph na yan. Okay, that is the demand curve. On the other hand, if the price of pork is very low, then ang taas ng demand niya sa market. Ibig sabihin, maraming quantity ng pork ang mabibili. Mag-aagawan ng mga buyers dyan. Okay, if the price is very low. Kita niyo yung relation? Price high, demand o quantities sold is low. Okay? If the price is low, then the quantities demanded ay mataas. Okay, so yan yung demand curve. Now, let's look at the supply. Okay, yung kulay green. Ito naman yung sellers or the supply curve. Okay? Kung titignan naman natin yung kulay green na yan, if the price of the pork is very low, then konti lang ang maipoproduce. Why? Because sellers won't want to produce pork kasi mababa yung kita nila dyan. Kasi ang baba ng bentahan. Kaya baka nga lugi pa sila doon sa mga cost. dun sa transportation or kung sa ano man, sa pag-aalaga, baka lugi pa sila. So, walang dahilan para mag-produce sila ng pork kasi lugi sila dyan. Okay, yung mga sellers. On the other hand, um, if the price of the pork is very high, okay, then tawag dyan, magkakaroon ng dahilan yung mga suppliers na mag-produce ng pork. Okay? Kasi ang taas ng bentahan. So, mataas yung kanilang kikitain. Okay? As you can see, meron lang isang point doon sa graph na nagmi-meet yung demand curve and yung supply curve. And you call this equilibrium price. Okay? At that point, tama lang yung demand at tama lang yung supply. Okay? The demand is matching the supply. Okay? So, bibilin mo sila at this equilibrium price. Kuha niya? At this point, the quantities produced are tama lang, ibig sabihin walang matatapon, ibig sabihin marami bumibili, and the price is just right. Okay, that is equilibrium price. Okay? So, paano naman if the price is very high? Okay? Let's say ang price ng, ang price ng pork is at this point. Okay? Ito yung price niya. Okay? At that price, ang daming magpo-produce ng pork kasi ang taas ng bentahan. Okay? But, the demand will be very low kasi ang mahal. Okay? So, ano mangyayari? Magkakaroon ng ang daming supply ng baboy. Ang daming supply ng baboy sa market. Okay? Pero this does not happen all the time. Maraming factors na nakaka-apekto dito sa supply and demand curve. But this is how it is normally explained. Okay? So, ayan. Kapag mataas ang, syempre eventually it will go down kasi mawawalan ng demand. Kahit gaano pa kataas ang bentahan yan, pero mababa ang demand. Okay, pero isip mo, does it happen? Anyway, you call this surplus. Ibig sabihin, there is an excessive supply of that item on the market. Okay? Kasi the demand is low because of the price and eventually, the price will go down doon sa reasonable price lang. Okay? Kakaroon tayo ng surplus. On the other hand, if the price is at this point, okay, if the price is at that point, magkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na shortage. Ibig sabihin, the demand is high, okay, but the supply is low. Okay? Kasi, tawag dyan, konti lang ang supply. Nag-aagawan yung mga tao. May shortage. Okay? Konti lang yung supply, tapos mura lang. Siyempre, ayaw ng mga sellers mag-produce nun kasi mura lang. Pero since mura lang, gusto yun ng mga buyers. So, ang mangyayari, mag-aagaw yung mga buyers and magkakaroon tayo ng shortage. Ano mangyayari? Eventually, tataas yung presyo and it will be brought back to the equilibrium price. Equilibrium price, yun nga yung sinasabi ko na tama lang yung presyo. Okay? The sellers, the supply meets demand. And it will meet there at the equilibrium price. So, if there is surplus, then syempre, eventually, it will go down doon sa equilibrium price. If there is shortage, it will eventually go up doon sa equilibrium price. Okay? So, that's how we explain the supply and demand curves. Itong demand pull inflation, because of the demand, because of the shortage, ang mangyayari, tataas yung presyo. Yun yung demand pull inflation. Okay? As in, parang yung price, hinihila pataas because there is shortage. Because the buyers want more. Diba? Sabi, the supply cannot keep up with the demand. Kaya hinihila ng demand yung presyo. Okay? Ito yung pagtaas ng price dito, that is inflation, demand pull inflation. Next is the cost push inflation. This occurs when the cost of producing products and services rises, forcing business to raise their prices. Okay? Katulad ng sa bakery. Okay, parang chain na to damay-damay na. If dun sa bakery, Sasabihin nila, ang taas ng presyo ng harina, ang taas ng presyo ng asukal. Then, syempre, yung presyo ng tinapay ay tataas din because they have to have markups. They have to have profit. Okay? Kaya, because of that increase in price of the cost of production, then tataas din yung price ng product. Okay? So that's cost push. And lastly, built-in inflation, it is sometimes referred to as wage price spiral. Of course, when workers demand higher wages to keep up with rising living costs. This in turn causes business to raise their prices in order to offset their rising wage cost, leading to a self-reinforcing loop where wage and price both increase. Sabi ng mga trabahador, taas sweldo. Of course, the employers, walan sila ng profit margin or liliit ang profit margin. So, syempre, ang gagawin nila, magtataas din sila ng prices ng products nila. Okay? And because of that rise in the cost of products, syempre, ang sasabihin naman ng mga employee, okay, taas sweldo ulit. Because of that taas sweldo, kailangan mag-increase ulit ng price ni company for them to afford that taas sweldo. Okay? So, yun. So, that taas sweldo thing, kaya hindi siya ganun kadaling gawin. Kasi pag nagtaas tayo ng sweldo, okay, the companies will decrease yung kanilang profit margin, okay, and most of them don't want that. So, mag-i-increase din sila ng price. And, ayun nga, padagdag yun ng padagdag. Okay? Ano yun? Parang spiral, ayun nga, sabi spiral effect. Okay? It keeps happening over and over. Okay? So, ayun. So, tapos tayo sa mga basics ng inflation. I hope you learned something from that. Now, i-explain natin yung inflation, yung math side naman ng inflation. Okay? So, yung mga formula, syempre, pe-present ko na rin dito. Inflation, ang kinocompute natin sa inflation ay dalawa. We have the cost of goods and services. Okay? Tapos, yung purchasing power of money. Pag nagsosolve ka sa eco, dapat, pag binasa mo yung problem, alam mo kung ano yung pinag-uusapan. Is it money or is it cost of goods? Kasi magkaiba formula niyan eh. Kasi inflation has different effect on these two. Okay? Pagka sinabi mong cost of goods and services, ang future worth ng isang item is equal to its present worth times 1 plus the inflation rate. F is the inflation rate, yung pinag-uusapan natin kayo na. Yung sabi natin, 2 to 3% ang ideal. Okay? Whatever is given dun sa problem. Raised to number of years. Okay? This is assuming that the inflation rate is steady. Okay? So that's it. Future worth of a item is equal to its present worth multiplied by, parang interest lang naman yan, parang compound interest lang. Okay? Next is the purchasing power of money. Tandaan mo na inflation negatively affects the purchasing power of money. Okay? If there is inflation, then your future worth of money is less than the present. Okay? So, tandaan mo lang na ang future worth ng purchasing power ng pera is present worth times 1 plus F raised to negative N. Okay? Or you can see it like this. F is equal to P over 1 plus F raised to N. Paliliitin ng inflation ang purchasing power ng pera mo. Okay? Didiscuss natin yan shortly kung ano ibig sabihin yan. Next is, if there is combined effect ng inflation plus interest rates. Okay? Siyempre, tulad ng unang discussion, dalawa rin ang apektuhan yan. We have the cost of commodities or the price of commodities and the purchasing power ng pera. Okay? Sa cost of goods and services, kapag may inflation, syempre, patataasin siya ng inflation. And if there is interest on that item, then patataasin din siya ng interest rate. So, ibig sabihin, both inflation and interest increases the price of goods and services. Okay? On the other hand, yung purchasing power naman ng pera, the inflation negatively affects the purchasing power of money. Tapos, pataas naman ang effect ng interest sa kanya. So, kontrahan. Okay? Kontrahan ng effect ng inflation tsaka interest rates. That's why, ang sabi nga nila, you have to find a way to protect your money from inflation. Tama? And that's by investing. Okay? Alis tayo dun sa topic na yun. So, ang formula dito, the future worth of the goods and items considering interest rates and inflation is P times 1 plus F raised to N times 1 plus I raised to N. Okay? Where N is number of years, I is interest rate, F is inflation rate. Okay? On the other hand, purchasing power ng pera, ang future worth ng pera mo is patataasin siya ng interest rate pero kakainin naman siya ng inflation. Okay? So, if inflation ay patataasin yung value ng isang bagay, then nasa taas siya. Kapag yung interest pala, patataasin yung value ng isang bagay, nasa taas siya. Pagka pahihinain, nasa baba. Anyway, ito lang naman yung tatandaan nyo eh. Okay? Pagka nasa baba, ibig sabihin, pinahihina niya yung future worth. Pagka nasa taas, ibig sabihin, pinapalakas niya yung future worth. Okay? That's it. Madali lang intindihin niya. Okay? And with that, I think we can now solve for sample problems. I think we have 4. Okay? At madali lang yan. Okay, so number 1, an item presently costs 1,000 pesos. Okay? If the inflation rate is 8%, that is very high. Per year, which of the following will be the cost of the item in 2 years? Okay? Unang-una, kailangan matandaan o maisip mo rito na, okay, ang pinag-uusapan natin is an item. Ibig sabihin, goods ang pinag-uusapan natin. So, ibig sabihin, patataasin yan ng inflation. So, it's as simple as future worth equals P, patataasin ng inflation rate, raised to N. Okay? So, F equals 1,000 siya ngayon. Ang ating inflation rate is 8%, so 1.08. Hindi ko na nilagay yung plus alam nyo na yan nangyari dyan. Tapos 2 taon siyang na-compound or 2 taon siyang nag-increase by 8%. So, kailangan pa bang calculahin ito? Ayan, 1166.4. And that is the answer. Okay? Ibig sabihin, literally, ang presyo niyan after 2 years is eto na. Diba? Ibig sabihin, yung 1,000 pesos bill mo ngayon, after 2 years, hindi nyo na kayang i-afford yung item na pinag-uusapan kasi tumaas na yung presyo niya. Ibig sabihin, hindi na kasing lakas ng 1,000 mo ngayon, yung 1,000 mo 2 years after. Kasi it can no longer afford this item. Okay? Next. An economy is experiencing inflation at an annual rate of 8%. If this continues, what will 1,000 pesos be worth 2 years from now? Dito, anong pinag-uusapan natin? Of course, from the arrangement of the question, alam mong pinag-uusapan dito is yung purchasing power of money. Okay? So, alam mo dapat na ang sagot mo dito ay mas maliit kaysa sa 1,000. Kasi there is an inflation na 8%. Ang tinatanong, magkano na lang yung worth ng 1,000 pesos mo 2 years from now? Okay? At kung isosolve natin yan, alam mo na ang formula ang gagamitin natin is P, dapat nasa baba yung inflation. Kasi pahihinain niya yung worth ng 1,000 pesos. So, 1,000, 1.08, 2 years. Ilan yan? That should be 8.5, ano din? Ayan, 857.34. Okay? So, that's it. Pero, parang isipin mo, sir, Kung may 1,000 pesos ako sa bangko ngayon, and there is 8% inflation, hindi ba 1,000 pa rin siya? Kasi hindi naman kakainin ng hindi naman kakain sabihin ng bangko kasi may inflation ha, wala muna tayong wala muna interest rate, kakainan muna namin yung pera mo. Hindi naman ganoon, di ba? Kung may 1,000 ka ngayon, 1,000 pa rin naman yan next 2 years eh. Ano ibig sabihin nito? Tanda, o kaya baka maisip mo, may 1,000 pesos ka sa bulsa ngayon. Ngayon, hindi mo sinuot yung pantalon na yon. After 2 years, 1,000 pa rin naman siya paghugot mo sa bulsa mo. Di ba? So, ano ibig sabihin ito? Ibig sabihin lang yan, after 2 years, ang kaya na lang bilihin ng pera mo ngayon, after 2 years, ang kaya na lang bilhin ng 1,000 mo is yung item na worth 857.34 ngayon. Okay? Let's put that into graph. Okay. This is present. Tapos this is future. Let's say plus 2 years. Okay? Ang pera mo, let's say ang pera mo, okay, ngayon ay 1,000. Tapos hindi mo siya ininvest, or hindi mo nilagay kung saan, or hindi mo ginastos, nandyan lang siya. After 2 years, 1,000 peso bill pa rin yan. Okay? Then, let's have an example of cost of goods and services. Okay? Let's have 2 items. Let's say item 1 and item 2. Okay? Ang worth ngayon ni item 1 is 1,000 pesos. Okay? Tapos, ang worth ni item 2 is 857.34 pesos. Okay? Considering the same inflation rate. So, ayun nga, 1,000 2 years after, sabi that is 1,166.40. Tama? So, si item 2 naman, after 2 years, ano nang worth niya? Oops, sorry. 857.34 times 1.08, 2 years, o 1,000 pesos na. Okay? Ibig sabihin lang yan, humina yung pera mo because after 2 years, hindi niya na kayang i-afford yung 1,000 peso worth item today because after 2 years, kung hindi mo i-invest yung pera mo, hindi niya na kayang tapatan yung presyo ng item na yun. But after 2 years, yung 857.34 pesos na item, you can still afford that with your 1,000. Anyway, humina pa rin yung pera mo kasi now, kaya niyang ibilin yung 1,000 pero after 2 years, hindi niya na kaya. So, ibig sabihin, humina nga yung pera. Okay? At ang kaya niya na lang bilhin is eto. Ibig sabihin na itong sagot mo na to, itong sagot na yan. After 2 years, ang kaya mo na lang bilhin is yung mga item na 857.34 pesos now and below. Okay? Ibig sabihin, yung items na 857.34 pesos above, hindi mo na yan kayang bilhin after 2 years. Hindi na yan kaya ng 1,000 pesos mo after 2 years because it has lost its purchasing power. Okay? This is purchasing power, not the value of the bill. Okay? Yun yung ibig sabihin ng formula na yan. Okay, next. Number 3, in 1980, a couple invested 10,000 for 5 years at the rate of 16% annually. During that time, the rate of inflation is 5% compounded annually. How much money will he give in 1985 and how much profit is realized over the 5 years? Okay. Yung pinag-uusapan is pera, money, purchasing power. So, we know that interest rates, because of their investment, patataasin nyo na interest rate, but kakainin yan ng inflation. Correct? So, you simply use the formula, 10,000, interest rate is 16%. That happened for 5 years, 1980 to 1985. Pero kakainin niya ng inflation na 5%. Okay, so yun na. Asan na yun? Oops. 1.16 raised to 5. Kaya kailangan yung pera mo lumalago ng more than the inflation rate annually. Yan, 16,456.73. Okay? And that's our answer. Ang profit natin is, ayan, syempre nagsimula ka sa 10,000 minus 10,000. Ang profit mo, 6,000. Okay? That's it. And lastly, we have number 4. A machine costs 20,000 pesos today. If inflation is 6% per year and interest is 10% per year, what will be the appropriate future value of the machine adjusted for inflation in 5 years? Okay? So this is a commodity because this is a machine. Okay? We know that inflation will make the price higher and interest rate will make the price higher as well. So patataasin nilang parehas yung worth ng pera. Anong machine? So let's write that directly. Inflation 5 years daw. Tapos interest rate 5 years din. Okay, so 43,104.51. Okay. So, ayun, ganun lang. Mahirap ba? Hindi, madali lang. Ang eco naman, madali lang. Madali lang yung mga solution. But you have to interpret the problem statements correctly. Ay, ganyan na lagi yan. Ang mga eco nga haba ng problem statements niyan. Pero maikli lang ang solution. Okay? Kailangan mo lang ng tamang analysis. Okay? So, next video ulit. So, I'll see you there.